Hello everybody, this is Gregory with 5 Minute Catholic Apologetics and Living, where 5 minutes of your time may get you to the divine. Today I'm going to posit the question, have we reached the pinnacle and past the pinnacle of liturgical abuses in the church and other things that were so pervasive in the 70s and 80s? Now before we begin, let's start with a prayer. Nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritui Sancti. Amen. Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto, sicut erat in principio et nunc et semper et in saecula saeculorum. Amen. Now, I'm 49 years old, so I grew up, I would say most of my memories, especially church-related, are probably from the late 70s and all through the 80s, and I've seen some really bad liturgical abuses. I went to a Catholic school and actually went to Catholic university and a Catholic high school, so I was in a Catholic milieu until I was 22. So I've talked about how I've seen the pantomime Our Father done when I was in college, and the liturgical dances, and all the common stuff that was pretty common in the 70s and 80s. Do I think that we have seen the worst of the abuses? And I would say yes. I think with the liturgical abuses, the majority of those liturgical abuses have died down. Yes, at World Youth Day, there was a mass that they were distributing the Eucharist and the wine in IKEA cups, which it's not necessarily makes the mass invalid, but you should not be using IKEA cups, because the thing, understand, like the chalice, the borium, all these things are only meant to be used for the Eucharist. So what happened to these cups? Are there some teenager eating cereal from them today? But as a whole, the liturgical abuses, the clown mass, the mariachi mass, a lot of these abuses you don't see as much as that we saw in the 80s and in the 90s. I think when it comes to church abuse stuff, it's the same thing. When the Boston Herald did all the spotlight stuff in the 2002 church abuse scandal, that really revealed a lot of the stuff. And what you noticed was a lot of it was from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And since then, especially in America, the USCCB has done a really good job of creating a system of reporting where they take these things seriously. And even the abuses that come out, most of them are going to be from very old priests that did it back in the 1970s. And we've talked about it before on the episode, the church is full of evil priests, where we addressed the sex abuse scandal, that, remember, it's only like 0.3% of all priests have ever been convicted of a sex abuse problem. And this is infinitely smaller than public school teachers, of foster parents, daycare workers, and so forth. But anytime a priest is even sniffed of doing anything inappropriate, the mass media covers it, because, of course, the mass media is anti-Christian, and in particular anti-Catholic. But I think the majority of the liturgical abuses and the priest scandals are dying down. That's not to say there aren't current ones going on, but also with that generation of priests dying off, and a lot of them are homosexual. We've covered this in a previous episode. That's something that's never discussed. That really was a crimson tide, a crimson mafia problem, was a homosexual infiltration of the clergy. And since a lot of those guys are dying off, and now we have better measures put in place, I don't think you're going to see another gigantic spike. Yes, you see different states releasing, like their DAs have done investigations on stuff that are coming out this year, but if you look at them, they're all from egregious cases that happened in decades ago, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And again, nobody is an apologist for what happened. It is egregious what happened, and these priests should be put in jail. I don't think any Catholic would say that they shouldn't. And the way that certain bishops covered it up was wrong as well. So I think if you look at these two big things, I think there's signs for hope. And I think a lot of ways, like you're climbing a mountain, I think we've hit the apex, and now it's going downhill, which is a little easier. I guess downhill sounds like a negative thing, but I think if you look at the trends, I think they're better. I think we have the younger clergy. The seminaries have largely been wiped out of the Marxists. Go to the video we did on Belladad. A lot of the Marxist, left-leaning, and homosexual clergy have been kicked out of the seminaries, even in large city seminaries. And so we are getting more Orthodox priests. Go to that great book, Goodbye, Good Men, that was written by Michael Rose. That was I think written in the early 90s, and it details very well like how the Crimson Mafia was in control of these seminaries. And if you had a heterosexual Orthodox man who had a vocation to priesthood, they would not allow him in at all. And they would use the psychological studies like, oh, he's got deep-seated, they would fill in some like very general thing to keep him kicked out. So I think a lot of that is gone. And I think if you look with the younger clergy tends, of course there's exceptions, tends to see the Mass as what it should be and the way it's always been, which is a holy sacrifice. And so you do see the younger priests bringing back more of the solemnity of the Mass and or have a less of a palate for the crazy liturgical abuses that we've seen in the past. So you see these younger priests, even someone want to do ad orientem. And remember, ad orientem has not been banned by Vatican II. You can do ad orientem, but you see them bring back ad orientem, you see them bring back better music, you see them bring back incense and all these things. So I think that's a good sign. I think in general, really the only bad sign is that the church, like all Christian groups, are losing numbers. And we talked about not that long ago, for every convert we get, we lose 8 Catholics. And so they're either going atheist to the nuns, or they're going to a megachurch. And I think this was kind of predicted by Pope Benedict, where he said the church was going to be smaller. And so that's unfortunate. And of course, our job as Catholics is always to answer questions in charity. You look at 1 Peter 3, our job is not to proselytize. Our job is to answer questions and defend the faith. So we should do our best to bring people back into the Catholic faith and to really just Christianity in general if they've gone to being atheists. And I think there's bright spots in that the church is growing, and you see it in Africa, you see it in the Philippines, you see it in these areas, but even in America, there is growth. The growth is mostly in Ordinary of the Chair of St. Peter. It's going to be in traditional Latin masses or traditional Novus Ordo parishes. You'll see the big families. You'll see the younger people there. So I think that is hope. And as the gray hairs die, who liked all the spirit of Vatican II kind of stuff, as they die off and those pastors die off, and we have the new seminaries coming into these churches, I think that's going to help kind of resuscitate the typical Our Lady of Suburbia, suburban churches. And in closing, I just wish that a lot of these pastors, these old pastors, would go to the aforementioned TLM or the ordinary churches and see these young people, these gigantic families, this fervent faith, and have the humility to be like, what can I learn from these people? What are they doing right that I don't have in my parish that has a tenth of the people and the majority, the average age is like 62. But unfortunately, a lot of these pastors are either just change agents or they're just so inculcated into their way, they're ossified into their ways that they're not going to change. But with time, I think we have reached the worst of the abuses. And I think the future, albeit numerically might not be promising, I think we're going to have a leaner, more fervent faith. And who knows, maybe we can go back and evangelize Europe. Guys, post in the comments. I'd like to hear from you. Until next time, take care, God bless, and pray.